Good afternoon, everyone. Hello, and thank you for joining us here today. I am Dr. Kristina Wolf, a research associate based at Newcastle University, and I would like you to welcome to today's Friday's DARE webinar, which is Resilient Transport Networks Supporting Emergency Services in a Changing Climate. Today we will discuss how we can strengthen and also adapt the UK transport infrastructure to enable rapid, coordinated responses from emergency services, highway authorities, and local partners during extreme weather disruptions. First, I am going to give you a quick introduction to DARE. DARE is the National Hub for Decarbonised, Adaptable and Resilient Transport Infrastructures, and it brings together UK stakeholders from industry, government, civic partners, and academia. We are funded by UK Research Innovations, EPSRC, and the Department for Transport. And today we have two presentations, one by Kris Westerby and by John Lamb. After both presentations, we will have time for questions. So please send your questions in the chat and we will address them during the Q&A at the end of the session following both presentations. Please also note that this presentation is being recorded and it will be shared with our colleagues across the DARE network. To start things off, we will begin today with Kris Westerby, who serves as the head of highways at Northumberland County Council and is leading the team responsible for maintaining and improving one of England's largest and most diverse highway networks. Kris has over 20 years of experience in winter service operations and emergency response. He has managed resilience planning and rapid interventions during severe weather events, including heavy snowfalls, prolonged freezing conditions, and major storms such as Storm Desmond in 2015, the Beast from the East 2018, Storm Arwen 21, Storm Kira and Dennis 2020, and also the exceptional winters of 2010. All these events have tested the Council's ability to keep communities connected, and Kris has overseen different strategies to adapt to increasingly unpredictable weather patterns and extreme conditions. Looking ahead, Kris's focus is on building robust systems that embrace innovation and data-driven decision-making to tackle the challenges of climate change and also future extreme weather. The goal is to ensure that Northumberland remains resilient, safe, and connected, no matter what the forecast brings. So thank you, Kris, for joining us today, and I would like to invite you to start your presentation.
Good afternoon, everybody. So, as I said, I'm Kris Westerby, Head of Highways at Northumberland. I'm going to run through resilience in Northumberland, and if we don't do any of this, no one can travel on network, no one can get connected, and emergency services would fail to get to their intended destinations. So when Northumberland's a big county, so today I want to cover operations and the impacts of those operations, the challenges to support services, changes we've seen in the last sort of 10 years, and what we're doing as Northumberland on intelligence gathering and information gathering across multiple systems, which I'll touch on. So Northumberland's, it's a big county. We've got over 5,200 kilometres of network. Our winter operations is built up 116 staff working across a 3-shift rota in different areas of Northumberland, ranging from Berwick across to Allendale up in the Pennines. We've got 9 salt barns, big dome salt barns to keep our salt stocks dry. We've got 28 gritters with 4 spares, snow blowers, which you can see in the image here. That's what we class as a snow blower, which we predominantly use on our higher ground. A lot of grip bins. We do around 3,000 kilometres of our network during the winter. That's primary and secondary routes. And our neighbourhood services team support us clearing footpaths in town centres and villages. The decision-making process is delivered by 3 trained winter service delivery managers who's got a lot of experience, over 10 years each on winter services, and we kind of set that as a standard in Northumberland. They've got to deliver winter services for a number of years before they can take that manager role because of the impact that can take. So I'm just going to touch on the process. So Northumberland's split into 5 climatic domains. We get updated weather reports from Meteor Group, a sample there on the page in the bottom right-hand side. Our network's thermal mapped, which is the different colors. That just splits our domains, and we know what temperature each road section will be at a certain given time based on forecasting. And we've got forecasting stations across the network. They're the sites of our forecasting station. We've recently updated those sites, so they're all standardized. We've got thermal imaging, we've got sensors and probes in the road, we've got CCTV cameras and solar powered. So we've got that optimized view of the network, which you can see there. So that's what we get when we look at our web-based Vaisala system from the weather stations. So we get air temp, dew temp, humidity, surface state, and on the bottom right you can see the graph there shows forecast temperatures based on our thermal mapping. So we assess all that data that comes into us as a council, we'll review that, and then we'll make the decision for the next 12 hours based on the forecast. We also do the same for Newcastle City Council as well. We're the decision maker for Newcastle City, and we've done that for a number of years as well. So a lot of those stations you can see cover the entire northeast. So when we look at it, we get reports every 12 hours. We've got a direct link into Meteor Group if there's any changes. We get our first forecast for the next 12 at 11 a.m. So we want to make our decision as soon as possible to get all the resources ready to go whenever the weather changes or when we feel it's necessary to treat the network. It's digital, so we inform all our drivers by text. We've got everything documented. It's digital diary, so we've got a full audit trail of any decision that's made, and we get everything published by 1300 hours on that same day, informing all residents via social media posts and neighbouring networks. We've also got automated gritting in Northumberland, so our entire fleet is automated, so meaning that gives us that resilience for drivers to travel any part of Northumberland, so they don't have to have the local knowledge of the area. So we can send a gritter that may be based, say, in the southeast sector in Blythe, and that can travel all the way up to Berwick just by pre-programming the selected route. The back of the gritter is automated, so it knows what spread pattern to use at any particular point on the network. And then on the bottom right there, you can see that gives us an exact snail trail of the route, the gritting spread at the time, and the time that road was gritting. It's very good when people put queries forward to us as a council. So it's been very, very positive change and very efficient. We can also report back to the police. We can also report back to residents on when this particular road was gritted, and it forms our Section 58 defence, because we've got to defend ourselves as an authority for any decision that's made anywhere on our network. So typical kind of season for us, probably last year, 24-25. So like I said, we've got 28 primaries, 26 secondaries. We've got a backup support with local agricultural farmers as well. So if it snows, they can go out and plough designated routes. Again, they're tracked, so we know exactly where they've been. We had 87 days of operation last season. So our season runs from October through till March. So 87 of those days we were doing something, treating or ploughing. 104 treatments, so there'll be double treatments on the 87 operational days. 23,000 tons of salt and 278,000 miles, and that's 11 times around the equator. Factoid there. So for a snow event, that's kind of what we look at. So that was 2021. Typical 2 weeks of snow for us in Northumberland. Again, run our shifts, we run our snow blowers, we run all the gritters every sort of 24 hours. 11-hour shifts I tend to do, 10, 11-hour shifts, depending on working time directive and domestic drivers regulations, what we work to. 12,000 tons of salt near enough. And then by the time we filled all the salt bins, gritted the footpaths, etc., that bumps itself up to 14,000 tons. But you can see there, 84 staff used, 9 supervisors, around 4,000 hours worked. Key fact for us as Northumberland, that all this work in Northumberland's voluntary. So it's not mandatory, it's not contractual. So all our staff work voluntarily these excessive hours and delivering winter services. That section on the bottom, that photograph on the bottom, that's the A68. So that sign will be around 2.7 to the base high, so you can see how far the snow's been ploughed and been drifting. And the gentleman you can see in the top, that's one of our local guys up in Allendale, and that's where the snow blower's been and cut through the snow at Allendale, and I think that was around about 8-9 foot at that particular time. We get the demand from fire control, so any request from emergency services, that goes through our fire control department, that goes direct to our managers and supervisors. So that week and a half, we got 240 requests, footpath clearance requests, gritting requests, we get palliative care requests, we get requests from social workers to get access to remote houses. We've got to deal with all that demand throughout the winter, but even more so during long periods of snow. These are our farmers' routes. So the graph on the right-hand side is what our farmer network is. So they get treated on prolonged periods of snow or when surface temperatures are going to stay below zero from 8:30, and if there's snow on the ground. We also support that with 4x4s, so we can get the small remote areas where we can't get our gritters in large HGV vehicles. These are really, really important during the winter for palliative care patients, medication to certain residents. We get the demand from ambulance service, NHS, to get staff to remote locations, especially in the higher ground and in Kielder area and places like that. In addition, we support Northumberland Water and get access to local pumping stations, because if they go down, we don't want towns and villages cut off with main water supplies during that period. So we liaise closely with Northumberland Water during the winter period to make sure that their tankers and equipment can get access to pumping stations. If everything goes wrong and we can't treat the 3,000 plus kilometers of network, we draw back to this resilient network. So that's our resilient network, which we'll focus all our resources on to make sure that key hospitals, fire stations, schools, etc., access is maintained at all times. So that's our fallback position, if you like, if the weather gets really severe. So case in point, Beast from the East, around about 5 days into that, we dropped back to our resilient network for a 24, 48-hour period, just to ensure that that network was clear. We had to capture drift and snow on the high ground, and then even on some of our A roads traveling north-south. Once the resilient network's back to a safe condition, then we focus on all of the networks with all that additional support that I mentioned earlier. So events since 2015, kind of plotted these down for you just to see what we get regularly over a 10-year period. So we've had Storm Desmond, not snow, but we had snow on our high ground during Storm Desmond. Arwen, Eunice, Aisha, Ewan. So we get a lot of storms up where we are in Northumberland, and the teams have got to ensure that whatever comes across us, we've got the tools, equipment, staffing to deal with on our network. So things have changed. So hopefully I've explained how we're set up for winter. We're good at it. It's kind of what we do. We've got all the systems in place. We've got the fleet in place. But what we're experiencing now are significant wind, flooding issues. So it's just as recent as October the 8th last year, we had 70 mil of rain in a town centre, which was unheard of. The left-hand image shows that impact in the town centre. Unfortunately, we were completing construction works. We were doing a regeneration project at the time. So a lot of blame got put down to us doing the regeneration works and doing drainage works, etc. But through the data gathering, we had a local weather station and then work with the Environment Agency. We're allowed to explain and educate people that we had 70 millimetres of rain within 24 hours, irrelevant of what infrastructure we had in that area. It would not have coped with that. Plus, that image on the left, that's got tidal influence as well. So we had high spring tides as well. The slide on the right is a heat map of impact. So that's the demand for the service just on flooding issues across Northumberland. So when we get these heavy rainfall periods, we get the storms. That's what Northumberland looks like in a snapshot there on the right-hand side. So because of that, we've had to change our approach during winter as things like that becoming more prevalent, they're becoming more frequent through our experience. The slide on the left is one of our main arterial routes that was just flooded out, tidal, same on October the 8th, shut the road, lots of traffic everywhere, puts pressure on the A1, puts pressure on our local network, which it can't handle, and then we're in big trouble. The other images are Arwen, that again, we got put on a red alert, red warning, and then we had to deal with Arwen storm issues, trees down, and the image on the right-hand side is what you call a minor impact, a minor storm that we had down in an area called Hexham, but again, big impact on the road network. So we've changed things. We used to just have an out-of-hours response plus winter response, so we've had to step that up now. So there are levels of escalation, but what we've done now is that everyone who's a driver on winter services is also an operator on out-of-hours resource. So we've got that full dedication of 109 staff covering the entire winter period, irrelevant of what happens, what kind of weather we get, what incident we get over that October to March period. We've also had to train and equip ourselves with additional flood support and pumps. So that's what we've had to do as an authority, just because the tidal impact and the rainfall. There's a lot of rivers in Northumberland. We're starting to get a lot of surface water issues and a lot of flooding. Additionally, just to get where we need to be, we've got procedures for local towns and local streets. So Bennett's Walk's a street in Morpeth. Morpeth was flooded out in 2008. There was a dam constructed, but we couldn't engineer out the risk. So then we've got specific pumps to pump back into the water course from Bennett's Walk. So that's a little bit of a funny one, but the residents are educated and well informed. So when we get the warnings through, we deploy pumps ready for any surface water impacts in that area. We've got additional sensors in that image I've just shown you in Hexham Bunker site, and then we've got a lot of subways in a certain town in Crampton, so we've had to put sensors in there with digital analytics to give us warnings to go out and check pumps and maybe clear areas around there. So a lot of work goes on, and there's a lot of preparation, a lot of tech, and a lot of local knowledge, and fundamentally, this is kind of our guide. This is what we look at in Hazard Manager. So all our staff have got access to this during that winter period. We collate duty managers' reports. We've got media groups sitting in the background. We've got those 22 weather sites, and then we've got our reports from Environment Agency and Met Offices. And this is always slow when there's a snow event if anyone uses it, but it's a really, really good piece of software. So what we're doing now is we're gathering information, gathering intelligence. So when staff leave, we've got all that digitally captured. We use a system called Alloy to do that. That image in the middle there, that's the staff out of hours calls in the last 12 months. There's been 1,863 out of hours calls made to our service over the last 12 months. That's then captured digitally on Alloy. The staff are on tablets. It's risk assessed. And then we've got that audit trail, and that feeds back into fire control. It goes into civil contingencies if need be, bronze if there's bronze command set up, or silver. We've got all that data so people can make decisions during a storm event and action plans if we need to start looking at prioritizing certain areas, schools, etc., villages, town centres. If there's critically vulnerable people, we've got that mapped. We've got all our flood database digitally mapped as well, so we can sit with a big screen and look at where the risks are depending on what weather's going to hit us. We use Fix My Street as well, so all reports are captured on there so the residents can see what's been reported in their towns and villages so they don't make duplicate reports. And then on the top right, we've got AI data capturing. So our 12 highways inspectors drive around our network. They capture all the data. We can see surface water issues. And then post any weather event, we drive around key resilient network to check that there's no defects forming, surface water issues, etc., etc. So that's our plan for now. What that gives us, that slide just captures the demand again for the service. Out of hours reports on 2024, you can see the kind of reports we get there. Fire request is just direct from fire service if they need additional assistance. Police requests could be something from an RTC or a request from the public. Sandbag requests, we get a lot of those. Any spillages on the road, etc., etc. And then the winter service demand down the bottom, that kind of shows you what we get as a winter services team throughout the season. But what those systems that I've previously shown give us is that evidence to go back to the members of the public or reporter and say, no, this is done. This is what we've done this morning. We'll do that again this afternoon, or we'll do that again tomorrow. That allows us to track monthly across multiple years to see where our peaks and troughs are. So then we can look at resource planning. We can build business cases for the future to get additional support, go to council for funding. So all this data is transparent, the public can see it, and then we can access it as officers of the council to then prove a point going forward if we need additional support. And that's the end of my presentation.
Thank you very much, Kris. Thanks, really appreciate the presentation also for giving us this very great overview. We will share the questions just for later, if you don't mind. And with that, I will now like to hand over to John Lamb, who has held public sector directorships, including Manchester City Council, Calderdale, Thurrock, Trafford, Buckinghamshire, and also Essex. Prior to that, John has led major engineering projects and operations at Heathrow and Stansted airports. And as chief officer in Calderdale, he witnessed firsthand the massive impact of the Boxing Day floods in 2015. Since then, he has championed the need to better understand resilience and response across the civil resilience community. And with DFT, he co-led the influential 2021 Deeming Report. Now, John chairs the UK Adaptation, Biodiversity and Climate Board, part of UK Roads Leadership Group, and covering over 200 highway authorities, council and trunk roads. A review is now underway of the Code of Practice for Well-Managed Highways. As board chair, John is leading on both mitigation, net zero, and adaptation to the impacts of climate change. And with that being said, John, we look forward to your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm hoping you can hear me okay.
Yes, all good.
Excellent. So I can't now see the rest of Zoom. I am very much a Teams man, what can I say? But I'm hoping you can see this. So the purpose of my presentation is really looking at the challenges associated with moving towards an all-hazard resilience. Kris has very neatly outlined how a traditional winter service, which is about vehicles responding to two hazards, snow and ice, has had to become far more nuanced in terms of dealing with a range of challenges and flooding. But what I'd like to just try and talk about is this concept of winter, because across 200 highway authorities, winter service is still seen as about gritters and snowplows. And in reality, as we know, and as a question in the chat came through, climate change is occurring, and the impacts and consequences on highways is creating different challenges. And those challenges are 24/7, 365. And that these events are already baked into the current climate. So even if we stopped climate change from increasing any further, there are already baked in extreme events that are not about far off average. They are a clear and present hazard. Have we seen in Valencia, tragically, last year, as we saw in Texas, and as we saw in Belgium, Germany, and tragically the flooding that's occurred in Southeast Asia. We're all experiencing extreme events. It is a new, intense reality, and every single one exceeds all previous records. And they're becoming more frequent, and often multiple hazards. As Kris mentioned, you're dealing with gritters and floods at the same time, and often you can get cascading failures affecting the infrastructure of rail, road, bus, as well as the asset loss. And ultimately, as highways, we are there providing an asset, but ultimately it is about the users of that asset that I will revert to. Increasingly, we're now looking at the concept of preparing for your worst day across the UK. and it is there's a series of exercises that some authorities are doing, and it is literally your worst day ever exercise. And that isn't just about an emergency planning exercise that says, oh well, look, there's a coma site gone off, or there's a large humanitarian disaster and a bus has hit a low bridge. This is fundamentally about every single lifeline that we take for granted at the heart of our communities is actually not available to us. So when you consider how London failed to cope with 100 millimetres of rain in 2021, the Belgium-Germany devastating floods that cost 240 people, it was only a little bit more than that. So ultimately we need to unfreeze mindsets and create a siren call to government about what it is we're preparing for. So with the Department of Transport, I actually attended over the course of this year a series of regional events. Kris was at the Northeast event. It was a lot of people that I've met over the course of the year. But let's be clear, there's about 214 highway authorities, including trunk road agencies. And the purpose of these events was to bring together the Met Office, the British Geological Survey, mining remediation, and to look at how we deal with this transition from understanding the need for decarbonisation into actual direct action. And as was mentioned, the United Kingdom Roads Leadership Group, the foremost body that brings together all of these highway authorities, I chair one of these boards. It's a new board, the ABC board, the Adaptation, Biodiversity and Climate Resilience. So let's just look at this new winter, and I'm going to actually immediately break from that, because if you look at some of the extreme rainfall, 5th of December 2015, that was Desmond, Storm Desmond, and Cumbria, Lancashire, and Dumfries and Galloway got really hit hard by Storm Desmond. It was the worst ever flooding within sort of recent history. However, to be absolutely clear, we need to prepare for Storm Desmond plus 30%. That's salutary, because the Cumbrian event met the definition of a disaster as designed by the United Nations. If you look at a non-summer event here, 16th of August 2020, 240 millimetres in just a few hours in a Norfolk field. Now, there is nothing about the British meteorology that prevents that 240 millimetre event occurring anywhere in the UK. Okay? And actually, over the last 60 years, over half of those events have occurred in the last decade alone. And as Met Office say, the impact of that falling in an urban area, that will be catastrophic. That's going to be our version of Valencia. And in some respects, just looking deferentially at Valencia just over 12 months ago, that was 700, nearly 800 millimetres of rain. That was a particular type of rainfall where Spain has built around these kind of intense events because of the Mediterranean climate. But for them, this was an event that broke all records. So we across the UK will experience events that are far worse than we've ever seen. So let's just look at something in terms of, again, sticking with rain. If you look at the frequency of which these 20 millimetres of rain an hour, now that is usually enough to exceed all the urban drainage systems. And that is where you get your surface water, where Kris has talked about where underpasses will be at risk. And you look at this as being rapid intensifications. It is very noisy. You know, you can look at it and say, oh, we've had a mild winter, or it's been quite dry. And actually, to be absolutely clear, we're still in drought conditions right now across most of the UK. But what you are starting to see here is quite compelling information about the way in which these 20 millimetre events, that when they hit your community, your local highway drainage networks will not be able to cope with it, and that will cause surface water flooding. So let's just look at these climatic trends in more detail, because this isn't just about winter. This is about hazards that occur across the entirety of the year. So let's just switch hazards. And recently the Department of Transport has published 20 hazards or thereabouts across the different climatic themes and natural hazards. We're already living with 40 degrees Celsius in the UK. When that was first predicted, it wasn't expected to hit until 2040, 2050. We're now talking about a possibility of 45 degrees Celsius in the UK. Now that is hot for us. Other countries might be able to live with that, but the very fabric upon which our communities are built, and if you look at the urban heat island of places like Oldham or Thurrock or Rochdale, these areas are often Victorian communities with very little tree canopy. Now, people live in this heat island, so therefore there will be impacts. Let's look at flooding. I think we've already touched that. But Storm Babette, you know, we've had so many different storms, Storm Kira, Storm Dara. We're starting to lose track now of them. But for me, the compelling one, as Kris mentioned, was Storm Desmond, Storm Eva, and Storm Frank, and I will revert to those in due course. But every single time these hit, it breaks the records. So professionals, frontline leaders like Kris have got to work to try and second guess what's going to hit where and when across all these different hazards. Of course, something that Northumberland also has seen and is wildfires. And when you look at this, there were wildfires in February. So you don't need extreme heat. You just need that drought conditions and some of the infernal barbecues that people pay a fiver for in Tesco's, and yet they cause devastation across rural UK. So these are very much natural hazards. Well, it's also important to understand the very bedrock upon which Britain is built. Well, as we all know, it's not a bedrock. And yes, we've got the millstone grit of the Pennines, but we've also got significant areas of soluble rocks, running sands, debris flow. We're starting to see more landslides occur, not least being the water table will increase, and that actually lubricates the rock strata. Then you get periods of drought. So we're starting to see cycles that would previously have occurred maybe over decades, now occurring within a given winter. The further suggestion was, is a changing climate going to reduce the amount of traditional winter maintenance? Well, if you look at Renfrewshire in Scotland, they are throwing down 50% of the amount of salt, okay, than they have historically done. However, you've got certain communities that have to throw down more because you get more marginal nights. So obviously, you know, being satirical here, if it freezed on the 1st of December and thawed on the 31st of March, that's one freezing event. And other than just topping up the snow, or topping up the salt, you know, and assuming it didn't snow, that'd be fairly straightforward how we deal with it. But what we're seeing is every single day, freeze thaw, and that's one of the reasons why we've got a few potholes. And there's a panorama program on potholes on Monday night if you want to see that. So let's just look at highways and how I am reframing highways across the UK here. We need to start looking at highways as lifelines. They are the fundamental service in the community. That when they operate, they're just invisible, but they're part of an integrated network of assets. But ultimately, when disruptive, decisive intervention is required to stabilise the incident, because ultimately transport is the ring that binds all rings. If there was an incident at home right now, and assuming you're not home working, you'd want to immediately rely on the train, the bus, or your car to get home or walk home. And if you've got a fundamental impact, like I had in Storm Eva, just after Storm Desmond, when I lost 6 bridges. When you look at the very fabric of what lies beneath one of these bridges, this goes to show how our roads are not just something upon which we drive. They are at the heart of our very way of life. So let's just look at for a moment then at this resilience cycle that I'm increasingly working. We need to anticipate the changing climate. We need to assess and set priorities. Kris mentioned about prioritization during an incident. A lot of that now is giving us intelligence and insight as to where future impacts might occur. But even if we knew where the impact was going to occur, there's no pot of money for the government nationally to prevent that happening. Okay, so we know that there will be catastrophic failure of assets over the next 10 years, but we won't know precisely where they are until it actually happens. So wherever the events occur, we do need to validate and learn and constantly prepare. And ultimately, when we are in incidents, we do need to respond, and that needs to be multi-agency. And then we'll recover and hopefully build back better. Which is a United Nations term, long-standing United Nations term. But ultimately, as highway professionals, we need to stabilise, we need to exercise that interim control. When can we let blue light services through? When is it safe to allow pedestrians through, as opposed to allowing vehicular traffic through? And when you consider when a major incident occurs, in those early minutes and hours of an incident, the desire for information, the demand is way up here, but the availability of information is way behind. So you get this zone of greatest uncertainty. And that's where professionals need to be supported with new and different kind of tools, because a weather station might give you certain insight, but ultimately once the impact has occurred, then you need to do things differently. So with my good colleague and associate, Dr. Hugh Deeming, who's I don't believe he's on this call, he's got some other commitments over in Wales right now. The Department for Transport, the government, and the UK Roads Leadership Group did highlight in these two reports, looking at all the events, and we need to have suitably qualified experience and empower people. And it's got to be seen within the context of highways emergency management. We responded well in 2010 when we ran out of salt as a sector. What we can't do for every single one of these hazards is wait until they occur. We can't wait for our own personal epiphany before everyone gets it and starts to operate. So consistently, and the UK is leading on this around the world, is the need for consistent, rapid impact assessment. That's not necessarily about, oh, we've got a defect here, we've got a tree down here, or a street light, or a pothole. That's actually thinking about things at scale and at pace in terms of how we deal with emergencies. And then the need for mutual aid on a regional and national basis. And within highways, certainly within England, we are not as well drilled as we should be. And whereas we've got lots of very good plant and equipment for snow and ice, we don't for other hazards. So just to summarise, we know when there are impacts. We know the consequences in terms of diversion. We need to understand the social vulnerability associated with that, and accordingly we have the duration. It's going to be shut for 2 weeks or 2 days. How can we increase that urgency and pace? And there are systems available. This is the Godstone sinkhole. But ultimately, how do you communicate to all your partners that we're going to be pushing resources to the top right of this area, the really high priority locations, and how do we get that shared situation awareness across all community agencies and community partners? Let's just jump here to on the final slide. Leicestershire County Council. This was last winter, and here you'd got the impact of a serious flooding, and no sooner has the flood happened than they were out doing the gritting. But the interesting thing here, all 10 authorities across this area wrote to the government and they demanded help. They wanted money, they needed money, but that was just dealt with as a local issue. And across 200 highway authorities, the reality is that there are 200 local responses to this, and there's no clear and consistent way of ensuring that the communities that we support and where you live will get the same level of response in the way that Kris has described and the way in which I've described that we need to now prepare for our worst day. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, John. Just on time, 15 minutes. Thank you once again, Kris and John. And I would now like to open the floor to questions. I've seen that we did receive some in the chat. I also saw that, Kris, you were busy answering them, but I think I'm just gonna repeat them once more for the audience. So we had one question from Jin Yun. Do you feel global warming has caused less snow in Northumberland during winter? And if so, will there be any changes because of this to improve the resilience in other aspects in the region? Kris, if you don't mind, could you just unmute yourself? Thank you.
Yeah. I've put it in the chat. It varies. Weather's so unpredictable. We've had rain in July. We've had snow April, May in Northumberland. But the same consistently over the last 2 years, we've had a week of snow in November for some reason, and then it gets milder towards Christmas, and then we get the wet, inclement weather. But what we're doing this year is, well, because like John mentioned, a lot of authorities are getting marginal forecasts, so they're still putting the same quantity of salt down, which is getting washed off, or the temperatures are plus 2 degrees. We always work in road surface temperatures on winter, so when we quote temperatures, it's always road surface temperatures, which is around 2.5 degrees lower than air temperature. So we're still putting the same amount of salt down. So we reviewed that last year, and now we're looking at cold routes where we've remapped our thermal routes, and we're looking at cold routes specifically where we think we can just treat areas what we know are going to get them to, say, -1 or below 0 temperatures, which should make us more efficient, less demand on resources, and hopefully use less salt during the winter period. So we're testing that this year, but you've got to get the optics right on that, because as soon as an authority says we're changing something on winter services or we're changing a gritting route, politically, publicly, council's doing less, trying to save money, but it's not about that. It's about using resources more efficiently and getting prepared for what's coming.
Thank you for that. And while you are already there, would you mind just answering the next question? So it was about, do you undertake and collaborate with motorway and trunk road contractors?
Yeah, so for Northumberland, until next year, we maintain the A69, the east-west link. So we've always maintained that for the last 26 years. So next year, that goes back to National Highways, which is a major concern for us, because the way they set up their contracts, they set up a thing called a MAC contract. They've got a number of MAC contracts, and it's going to be cut in half essentially, and 2 different companies are going to treat the A69. So we're liaising with National Highways on that and ensure that east-west link, because the 66 is a pinch point, A66, so that until that's dualed and that's improved, then the A69 will become that arterial route east and west. So that's a key focus in the next 12 months. A1 north-south, we've got strong links with National Highways on that, but if we need to, we'll put our resources on the A1 as a priority, because our local infrastructure can't cope with the amount of traffic if there's an issue on the A1. And again, that hasn't been dualed, so there's even more pressure on our main A roads if we don't clear the A1 as a priority. So in the past, we've put resources on that to get it clear, to ease congestion in our town centres and villages. What we tend to do as well is we use a system called One Network, but we use LiveLink. So LiveLink is a tool which is app-based, and you can put on your devices and put a road closure on site. So we'll put that road closure on site, which then updates sat-navs, Google Maps, etc. So people don't use those local roads what aren't treated and can be high risk. So we've been doing a lot of work with that over the last 5 years as well.
Just to come in onto that, and I'm going to segue into the next point from Catherine as well, if I may, Kristina.
Sure.
There are still too many examples where National Highways are not working as well as they should with local highway authorities. Being absolutely clear on this, and apologies or no apologies if there's anyone from National Highways on the call. It does occur. There was a major example of that during Storm Arwen. However, the person who learned the lesson on that from National Highways, I would have him by my side every year going forwards. And I think it's just a reflection of the fact that we're across highways, we're a learning community of practice, but we don't always have to learn before we implement it. And Storm Arwen did cause major complications. There were further issues in Yorkshire in 2023, where there was examples of national network being closed and the South Yorkshire authorities not being identified. I did a stint in Thurrock, it was about 8 years ago, and the only times we ever knew that the QE2 crossing was shut was when the traffic started to back up in our local roads. There wasn't the degree of integration that there needs to be. When you consider the amount of technology that we have got, and Kris has mentioned 1.net as one tool, it can't be garbage in, garbage out. It should be instant, and I think as an integrated network, not just with the national network, but also authority to authority, there does need to be shared situational awareness as soon as an incident occurs. I think we're getting better, but I'd like to think that the public probably think that we're a lot smarter than we actually are on this. In terms of the impact extreme heat will have on the transport networks, there's a range of random bizarre ones. When it gets very, very hot, you'll often get the moles will actually wander under the carriageway. So consequently, you get mole holes under the carriageway. So no one woke up this morning thinking you're going to hear about moles and climate change. But there, it's quite moist, and whereupon these little creatures who own our country as well as we do, and have got an equal right to this. But more substantively, you can start to see the structure of a bridge stay intact, but the supports either side of it will pull away as the clay in certain areas in the east of England will dry out. So there are questions then as to how do we deal with that? How do we deal with shrink swell and the consequences of that? And in terms of wildfires, let's just rotate back to that. I serve on the World Disaster Management Committee for Highways as the United Kingdom representative. I had a chat with colleagues in Portugal. They had 100 people die in a wildfire alongside their road. So the consequences of wildfires are just as real in this country as anywhere else. And actually, you need the right kind of vegetation alongside a road, because obviously if it's rich in nutrients, if it's creating shade and canopy, then it can hold water. And what we do know is that actually moist ground is better at holding further rainfall. So you do need, there's no single silver bullet on this. It does need to be far more nuanced. But damp adjacent ground is always better for wildfires. But we've got hundreds of thousands of miles of road in this country, and to re-engineer all of them is going to be extremely hard. So there's always going to be a degree of catching up, which is where with blue light services we just need to try and understand, as Kris has said, where there's an emergency where blue light needs to go out and you've got to send a gritter out or plough in front or something like that, then there is only so many there's only so much ability to do that. And of course in flooding, no highway authority's got vehicles or very few that can drive through 1.2 metres of flooded water. Kris, I don't know if you've got any Unimogs up there. I know Cumbria have got a couple, and Lancashire have, and Highland Council have quite a few. But Kris, you got any Unimogs up there for when it floods?
We used to have Unimogs, but we haven't anymore. We had Unimogs up on the higher ground, but no. And to balance that off, we actually don't let staff go into anywhere that you can't see what you're standing on and anything knee height anyway, because the risk's significant. And then similar with nighttime working, this storms generally happen don't on a Friday night for some bizarre reason, and then you're clearing up on the Saturday, and we just close roads now. To be fair, John, that's the safest option, and make sure we use one network and we notify everybody what's closed. Other than that, we did try and during Storm Desmond, I did plough water off the road on the A69.
Innovative use. And I guess for colleagues from the emergency services on the call, There is therefore that understanding that actually the simplest and straightforward technique for highway authorities is just to close the road. But at the same time, how as a sector do we respond? Because ultimately that might work for day one, day two, day three. I think after that there'll become a compelling case for people to restore and reopen. And as Kris has shown, he's got some pumps in a few locations. And that's really, really important. But when you've got major incidents, there's not enough pumps in the UK to be able to deal with the kind of events that happen at scale and at pace that are pan-authority.
Thank you very much for that. I see that Wei, she put another comment into the chat. So first of all, she's thanking you. And from her experience speaking with transport authorities, they recognize the importance of preparing for extreme weather events. However, resilience is often viewed as a long-term investment, while they are already dealing with a heavy maintenance backlog. So it seems difficult to allocate additional resources for resilience measures. And she would appreciate your thoughts on this.
Yeah, so fundamentally, one of the key things that I always challenge is when people start talking about climate averages in 2040, 2050. You do not need to wait for a typical day in 2040, 2050. It's called an extreme event now, and they are manifesting themselves right now. But what is quite clear is that we need to unfreeze all the professionals and His Majesty's Treasury across the United Kingdom, that actually a lot of those Treasury officials are going to be living in communities that are served by us. And when those links are lost, that it highlights that that's a short-term urgent requirement, not a long-term investment. What I would say though is there is a practical reality in that even if we knew that there was going to be a catastrophic storm of 2029 and it was going to lose 6 more bridges for me, there's actually no funding pot in the UK for that. Or if we know that there's going to be another major landslide, there is no national funding pot for that. So what I would say is that we have to recognise that all the information and insight, the data that Kris has shown there and that increasingly we get through rapid impact assessment and the like, is to say, look, where are these events occurring? What is the cost to them? What is the consequence of them? And then how do we actually show an evidence that these are getting worse and that actually it's above and beyond what we can cope with? But what is quite clear is that these extreme weather events and geological changes are impacting this the maintenance backlog as such. But fundamentally, even if we had a totally pothole-free road, the consequences of a changing climate, that actually rests upon the bedrock or otherwise of that asset. And it could well be you've got a perfectly maintained road that just gets washed away or impacted through some other other natural hazard. So the issue of resourcing is a really big one. There is no fix right now, but more money for potholes is not going to be relevant for adaptation for climate change. Kris.
Yeah, just to add to what John's saying, so the mechanism for authorities when we discuss maintenance backlog, etc., and there's not a priority, there's only the council can put a Bellwin claim in, but we've got to spend up around £800,000 before we can actually claim that money back. And for a direct labour organisation like Northumberland, we do not get the money back for the costs of our own labour. It's only contracted money, etc., etc. So that's really difficult for us. But through what we've done in Northumberland is been transparent with our information and data. That's allowed us to go to council cabinet, prioritise storm clear up and drainage, etc., for post-storm activities and get additional money to support and back up resources, equipment and tools. So we've had a lot of storms, we've had a lot of impact, but that's allowed us to use that data and information to gain additional funding through local means, but not national. And that's the issue, is the national money that post-storm event. We were lucky, weren't we, John, after 2015, DFT were involved and Steve came up and we went around and we got the money. But since then, there's been very little.
And interestingly, as Anne Carruthers from Leicestershire, whose slide I nicked earlier, they went to government, they asked to open Bellwin. So and they did not open it. And that is the reality. So we can incur, and as Leicestershire did, 10, 15 million pounds of the damage, and government wouldn't open Belwyn. So in that respect, we are we're on our own on this.
Thank you for answering that. Just in view of time, may I ask the audience if there's anyone else who has a question, and you're also more than happy to unmute yourself. In the meantime, John, if I may ask, so you did mention the different 200 highway authorities and all the regional workshops which you have conducted. So maybe apart from the funding, could you share a few lessons learned or areas of improvement, you could say, which need to be considered on this more national level when talking about the multi-agency coordination during extreme weather events?
Yeah, I think the key element is that we've already got a very, very well-drilled blue light relationship, but what we need to do is make sure that highways step up and step into that space. If you look at the FEMA over in the States, of the various command and control structures there, highways, people like Kris and I, we actually run two of those key fundamental areas. In the US, the police don't run any of them. There because they've got National Guard and stuff like that. So what I think we really need to do, and it's come out loud and clear, is that highways can and are stepping into this highways emergency management space themselves. They do need to talk better with blue light services, but at the same time, it is a different language that we speak, because uniform blue light services are very much command and control, and it is different than local government. However, local government are category 1 responders. National Highways is only a category 2 responder. Okay, and ultimately, consistently, we can, must, and all become suitably qualified and experienced and empowered professionals. And that was the fundamental point, along with rapid impact assessment and mutual aid, that will actually support multi-agency working.
Thank you very much for that. I would now like to thank once again both our speakers, Kris and John. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for your time, your presentations. You've given us very great insights. And I thank everyone for joining us here today on a Friday afternoon. And with this, I would like to conclude today's webinar and wish everyone a good weekend ahead. And thank you once again, everyone. Cheers.